The sky turned black at noon on a Tuesday in March, and Captain Lina Rodriguez knew that everything had changed forever. She stood on the bridge of the United Earth Defense frigate Valiant, watching her tactical display fill with red dots that represented enemy ships, and her heart sank into her stomach like a stone dropped into deep water. 300 alien warships had appeared from nowhere, folding space itself to arrive above Earth without any warning at all. And now they hung in the darkness like a swarm of metal locusts waiting to devour everything below them. The Varith Dominion had come to Earth, and they had brought enough firepower to burn the entire planet to ash. All stations report, Elena called out, keeping her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. Beneath the console where no one could see them, her crew responded with the calm professionalism that came from years of training. But she could hear the fear underneath their words, the knowledge that they were facing something far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered before. The Varith were not new to the galaxy, though they were new to Earth. Stories had reached human space through captured transmissions and the desperate warnings of refugee species fleeing the Dominion's expansion. And those stories painted a picture of absolute horror. The Varith conquered worlds the way a farmer harvests wheat, cutting down everything in their path and taking what they wanted without mercy or hesitation. They had destroyed 100 civilizations before turning their eyes toward the small blue planet called Earth. And not one of those civilizations had survived to tell their own stories. Admiral Yuan Xiaoming's voice crackled over the fleet communication channel, and Elena felt a small measure of comfort knowing that the legendary commander was still alive and still fighting. All ships. This is Admiral Yuan aboard the Beijing, the Admiral said, her voice carrying the weight of command that had guided humanity through a dozen smaller conflicts over the past 20 years. We are facing a superior force with superior technology, and I will not lie to you about our chances. The channel remained silent as every captain and crew member in what remained of the Earth fleet listened to their commander speak. What might be her final orders? The orbital defense platforms are gone. Admiral Yuan continued. The moonbase went silent an hour ago, and we have lost contact with the Mars colony. So we must assume the worst. Elena watched through her viewport as another Varith warship fired its weapons at the planet below, and a city that had stood for 1,000 years vanished in a flash of light that left nothing but scorched earth behind somewhere down there. Her mother had been visiting her sister in that city, and now there was nothing left to visit. We have 17 frigates remaining, the Admiral said. 17 ships against 300. And every single one of us knows what that means. But I want you to understand something important before we begin. Elena wiped her eyes and focused on the Admiral's words, pushing the grief down deep where it could not interfere with what needed to be done. We are not fighting to win, Admiral Yuan said. We are fighting so that the universe will remember that humanity did not go quietly into the darkness, that we stood up and we fought back and we made them pay for every inch of ground they took from us. The bridge crew of the Valiant straightened in their seats, and Elena felt something shift in the air around her, something that transformed despair into determination. All ships, engage at will, the Admiral ordered. Make them remember us. The Valiant surged forward along with her sister ships, 17 tiny vessels racing toward an armada that could crush them without effort. And Elena Rodriguez prepared to die fighting for her home. But then something happened that no one had expected. A new contact appeared on Elena's tactical display. A single vessel emerging from fold space at the very edge of the solar system. And the computer struggled to classify what it was seeing. The ship was massive, larger than any Varith capital ship. But its design matched nothing in any database that humanity had ever compiled. It was covered in what looked like scars. Great gouges and marks that suggested battles, fought across distances and times that human minds could barely comprehend. The vessel moved toward Earth with a speed that should have been impossible, ignoring the Vareth blockade as if it did not exist. And Elena watched in amazement as enemy weapons fire splashed harmlessly against its hull. "Why is that thing?" her tactical officer whispered. Forgetting all protocol in his shock at what the sensors were showing him, Elena had no answer to give down on Earth. In a bunker buried beneath what had once been the Swiss Alps, General Okonkwo watched the same mysterious ship approach, and felt something he had not felt since the invasion began. He felt hope. The general had commanded Earth's ground forces through 6 hours of absolute hell, watching his soldiers die by the millions as Vareth dropships descended on every major population center. And he had begun to make peace with the knowledge that humanity's story was about to end, that this unknown vessel changed everything. Or at least it changed the possibility of everything. "Get me a channel to Admiral Yuan," he ordered. "And someone figure out what that ship is and where it came from." His staff scrambled to obey, but the answers they found only deepened the mystery. The ship matched no known design from any species humanity had ever encountered, and its technology seemed to operate on principles that Earth's best scientists could not even begin to understand. It was old, incredibly old, and it carried the marks of countless battles fought across what must have been thousands of years, and it was heading straight for the heart of the Vareth fleet. Admiral Yuan watched the stranger approach and made a decision that would define the rest of human history. "All ships, hold position," she ordered. "Let us see what this newcomer intends to do." The mysterious vessel reached the Vareth flagship and stopped, hanging in space like a predator sizing up its prey. And then it did something that shocked everyone watching. It broadcast a message. Every screen on every human ship and every surviving television on Earth displayed the same image. A being that looked nothing like anything humanity had ever imagined. Tall and thin and wrapped in fabric that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. The being had too many eyes, and all of them looked exhausted, as if they had seen too much suffering across too many years. "I am the keeper of the vessel Reclamation," the being said, its voice somehow translating into every human language at once. "And I have come to repay an ancient debt." Elena Rodriguez stared at the screen and wondered what debt could possibly bring such a powerful being to humanity's darkest hour. She was about to find out. The keeper of the Reclamation floated in the center of its ancient vessel, surrounded by technology that had been old when the first human beings were learning to use fire. And it remembered 11,000 years was a long time even for a being such as itself. A creature that had watched stars be born and die and be born again. But some memories never faded, no matter how much time passed. The keeper remembered falling. Its ship had been damaged in a battle against an enemy whose name had been forgotten by the universe long ago. And it had drifted through the void for decades before gravity finally caught it and pulled it toward a young yellow star. It had been dying, its vessel breaking apart around it, and it had accepted that its long existence was finally coming to an end. But then something impossible had happened to primitive spacecraft, barely capable of escaping the gravity of its own planet, had intercepted the keeper's falling vessel and attached itself to the hull. Inside that crude ship were beings the keeper had never seen before. Soft creatures with only 2 eyes and skin that came in various shades of brown and pink. And they were trying to help. The keeper had attempted to communicate with them, to warn them that the radiation from its damaged engines would kill them if they stayed too long. But they could not understand its language, and it could not understand theirs. Yet somehow they understood that it needed help. And they refused to leave. For 3 days, those primitive humans had worked on the keeper's ship, using tools that were laughably basic compared to the technology surrounding them, patching holes and sealing leaks and doing everything they could to keep the strange alien creature alive. They shared their food even though they had barely enough for themselves. They gave their water even though their supplies were running low. They worked until their bodies began to fail from the radiation exposure. And even then they kept working, knowing they were dying but refusing to abandon the creature they had decided to save, the last of them. A woman with dark skin and eyes full of kindness had pressed her hand against the glass that separated them and smiled at the keeper before she collapsed for the final time. That smile had haunted the keeper for 11,000 years. Now it floated in the same vessel those humans had saved, upgraded and repaired, and enhanced over millennia of travel. And it watched their descendants face extinction. At the hands of the Varith Dominion, the debt would be repaid today. Admiral Ewan stared at the image on her screen and tried to process what she was seeing and hearing. An ancient debt, she repeated slowly. What debt could you possibly owe to humanity? And how could you have known about us 11,000 years ago when we had barely discovered agriculture? The keeper's many eyes blinked in a pattern that might have been amusement or might have been sorrow. And it began to speak in that strange translated voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Your ancestors found me when I was dying, the keeper explained. A small group of them had ventured beyond your world in a vessel made of metal and hope. And they discovered my ship falling toward your sun. Elena Rodriguez listened from the bridge of the Valiant. Her crew gathered around the main screen, none of them daring to breathe as the alien told its story. They could not speak my language, the keeper continued. They could not repair my ship with their simple tools. And they had nothing to gain by helping me, but they helped anyway. The being paused, and something that looked like pain crossed its strange features. The radiation from my engines killed them, it said quietly. They knew it would. But they stayed, and they worked, and they saved my life at the cost of their own. Admiral Ewan felt tears forming in her eyes as she imagined those ancient astronauts, humanity's first explorers, giving everything they had to help a creature they could not even understand. I have traveled for 11,000 of your years to reach this moment, the keeper said. I have visited 1,000 worlds and helped 100 species and fought in battles that your historians will never know about. But I never forgot the debt I owed. The Varith War Master aboard the flagship, Eternal Subjugation, had been watching this exchange with growing impatience. And now he decided to remind everyone present that he was still in command of this invasion unidentified vessel. He broadcast on all channels, his voice dripping with the arrogance of a conqueror who had never known defeat. You are interfering with Dominion business, and I order you to withdraw immediately or face destruction. The keeper turned its attention to the Varith ship, and something changed in its expression. The exhaustion was still there, but now it was joined by something harder. Something that had been forged in 11,000 years of watching species like the Varith crush innocent worlds beneath their boots. I have faced empires greater than yours, the keeper replied calmly. I have watched tyrants rise and fall across the length and breadth of this galaxy. And I have learned one truth that you would do well to understand. The Reclamation began to move, positioning itself between the Varith fleet and the planet Earth. Cruelty is common, the keeper said. Power is common, and the desire to dominate others is as old as life itself. But kindness is rare. The ancient ship's hull began to glow with energy that the Varith sensors could not identify or measure. When I find kindness, I protect it, the keeper declared. And I have found it here, in these humans who descended from the ones who saved my life. So I will tell you this once and only once. Every light on the Reclamation flared bright as a star. Leave this world, the keeper commanded, or I will show you what 11,000 years of gratitude looks like when it is transformed into war. The Varith War Master laughed at the threat and ordered his fleet to open fire on the strange vessel. It was the last mistake he would ever make. The Reclamation did not dodge the incoming weapons fire, and it did not deploy shields in any way that the watching humans could understand. Instead, it simply absorbed the energy, drinking it in like water flowing into a dry riverbed. And the scars on its hull began to glow with captured power. Then it fired back. Admiral Yuan had seen many weapons in her long career, but she had never seen anything like what the Reclamation unleashed upon the Varth fleet. Beams of light that seemed to bend reality itself lanced out from the ancient ship. And wherever they touched a Varth vessel, that vessel simply stopped existing. It did not explode or break apart or burn. It was simply there one moment and gone the next. It raced from the universe as if it had never been built at all. 12 Varth cruisers vanished in the first volley. 20 more disappeared in the second. The War Master screamed orders at his remaining ships, demanding that they focus all their fire on this impossible enemy. But the Reclamation moved through the Varth formation like a shark swimming through a school of fish. It was beautiful and terrible and absolutely unstoppable. And Elena Rodriguez watched with tears streaming down her face as hope returned to the human race for the first time since the invasion began. But the Varth were not finished yet. They had conquered 100 worlds by being willing to sacrifice whatever was necessary to achieve victory. And now they threw everything they had at the ancient ship that stood between them and their prey. The Reclamation killed them by the dozens, but there were hundreds more ready to take their place, and slowly, inevitably, the tide began to turn. The Reclamation was dying. Captain Elena Rodriguez watched the tactical display and felt her heart breaking as the ancient vessel that had given humanity hope began to falter under the relentless assault of the Varth fleet. The Keeper's ship had destroyed over 100 enemy vessels in the past hour, erasing them from existence with weapons that seemed to operate on principles humanity could not even begin to understand. But there were still too many enemies remaining. 200 Varth warships continued to pour fire into the Reclamation, and even a vessel that had survived 11,000 years of combat could not withstand such overwhelming force forever. Great cracks appeared in the ancient hull. An atmosphere began venting from wounds that no repair system could heal fast enough. The Keeper broadcast one final message to the human fleet, and its voice carried a weariness that seemed to span millennia. "I have done what I can." It said simply, "The debt is nearly paid, but I fear it will not be enough." Admiral Yuan listened to those words and felt something stir deep within her chest. Something that had been dormant since the first Varth ships appeared in Earth's sky. It was anger, pure, righteous, burning anger at the unfairness of it all. An ancient being had traveled across the stars for 11,000 years to repay a debt of kindness. And now it was dying alone while humanity hid in the shadows and watched. "No," Admiral Yuan said quietly, and then louder so that everyone on her bridge could hear her. "No, this is not how this story ends." She opened a channel to the entire human fleet, all 17 battered frigates that remained of Earth's once proud navy. And she spoke words that would echo through human history forever. "All ships. This is Admiral Yuan," she said, her voice steady and strong despite everything. "We have spent this day hiding and running and watching others fight our battles for us, and I say that ends now." Elena Rodriguez felt her spine straighten as she listened to her commander speak. "That ship out there came here because our ancestors showed kindness to a stranger." The Admiral continued. "They did not ask what they would gain, and they did not calculate the odds of success. They simply saw someone who needed help, and they helped." The crew of the Valiant looked at each other, and something passed between them that did not need words to express. "That is who we are," Admiral Yuan declared. "That is who humanity has always been. Not perfect, and not always wise, but willing to help when help is needed. Willing to fight when fighting is necessary. Willing to stand up and be counted. even when the odds are impossible. She paused for a single breath. "The Keeper came here to repay a debt," she said. "Now it is time for us to show that the spirit of those ancient astronauts still lives in their descendants. So all ships engage the enemy." She added one final order that made Elena's heart swell with pride. "Let us show them what humanity is made of." 17 frigates surged forward into the heart of the Vareth fleet, and the universe held its breath. The Valiant was the first to engage, swooping in behind a Vareth destroyer that had been focusing all its weapons on the reclamation. And Elena ordered her gunners to fire everything they had. The destroyer's shields flickered and held, absorbing the human weapons' fire without significant damage. But that was not the point. The point was to make the enemy turn, to draw attention away from the Keeper's dying ship, to buy precious seconds with human blood if necessary. "They are targeting us," her tactical officer reported. And Elena smiled grimly as the Vareth destroyer shifted its weapons toward the Valiant. "Good," she said. "That means they are not shooting at the reclamation." All across the battlefield, similar scenes played out as human captains threw their ships into the fight with reckless abandon. The frigate Snow Paulo, commanded by Captain Marcus Chun, identified a Vareth carrier that was launching fighters toward the reclamation and made a decision that required no thought at all. "All hands, brace for impact," he ordered. And then he aimed his ship directly at the carrier's engine section and engaged. Maximum thrust. The Snow Paulo struck the carrier at full speed, and both vessels disappeared in a fireball that lit up the darkness of space. Marcus Chun and his crew died instantly, but they took 500 Vareth with them and prevented a wave of fighters from reaching the Keeper's ship. The frigate Chennai, already damaged from the earlier fighting, found itself surrounded by 6 Vareth destroyers that had broken off to deal with the human nuisance. Captain Priya Sharma knew her ship could not survive such odds. But she also knew that every second those destroyers spent shooting at her was a second. They were not shooting at someone else. "Engineering, give me everything you have," she ordered. "We need to stay alive as long as possible." Her engineers worked miracles, rerouting power and patching systems, and keeping the Chennai flying through damage that should have killed them a dozen times over. They lasted 4 minutes against 6 destroyers. And in those 4 minutes, the reclamation was able to regenerate enough power to destroy another 30 enemy ships. The frigate Johannesburg took a different approach, broadcasting fake fleet signatures that made the VAR sensors believe there were 50 human ships instead of 17. The enemy split their forces to deal with threats that did not exist. And in the confusion, the reclamation tore through their scattered formation with renewed vigor down on Earth. The human resistance watched the battle in the sky and felt inspiration flow through their veins like fire. General Okonkwo, commanding from his bunker beneath the Alps, received reports from resistance cells around the world and made his own decision. "All units, this is General Okonkwo." He broadcast on every channel still functioning. "Our fleet is fighting and dying to protect us, and we will not let their sacrifice be in vain." He gave the order that sent thousands of resistance fighters into action against Vareth ground installations around the globe. In Beijing, a group of survivors emerged from the subway tunnels where they had been hiding and attacked Vareth Communications Center with weapons they had scavenged from fallen soldiers in Lagos. Factory workers who had been forced to labor for the Vareth turned on their guards and destroyed the equipment that had been used to process human prisoners for transport in Snow Paulo, named for the frigate that had just sacrificed itself above them. Civilians armed with nothing but courage and desperation overwhelmed the Vareth patrol and captured weapons that they immediately turned against other enemy forces. The resistance could not win, just as the fleet could not win. But that was not the point. The point was to fight. The point was to show the universe that humanity would not go quietly The point was to prove that the Keeper had not made a mistake in traveling 11,000 years to help a species that would help itself. Admiral Ewan watched her tactical display and saw her fleet dying one ship at a time. And she felt pride beyond anything she had ever experienced. Keeper, she broadcast to the ancient vessel. We stand with you. The Keeper's response came through with something new in its voice. Something that sounded almost like wonder. I know, it said. I have always known. And that is why I came. The reclamation stopped retreating and began to advance, its weapons blazing with renewed purpose. And humanity fought beside it. They were still outnumbered. They were still outgunned, but they were no longer alone. And they were no longer afraid. The tide of battle began to shift. The Keeper of the Reclamation had lived for a very long time, long enough to watch civilizations rise and fall like waves upon an endless shore. And in all those countless years, it had learned many things about the nature of existence. It had learned that power was easy to find, but difficult to keep. It had learned that cruelty was the default state of the universe, the path of least resistance for those who wanted to dominate others. It had learned that most species, when faced with overwhelming odds, would surrender or flee or simply give up and wait for the end to come. But it had also learned, on a handful of precious occasions, that some species were different. Some species would fight not because they believed they could win, but because fighting was the right thing to do. Some species would sacrifice themselves for strangers, would give everything they had to help others, would choose death with dignity over survival without honor. The humans were such a species. The Keeper watched through its sensors as tiny human ships threw themselves against the Vareth fleet, dying by the dozens, but never retreating, never surrendering, never stopping. It watched as human soldiers on the planet below attacked enemy positions with weapons that should have been useless against Vareth technology, and somehow won small victories through sheer determination. It watched as a species that should have been broken and defeated instead rose up and fought back with everything they had, and something inside the ancient being shifted. The Keeper had intended to fight and die here, to repay the debt it owed, and then finally rest after 11,000 years of wandering the stars. But now it saw another possibility, a chance not just to save humanity today, but to give them the tools they would need to save themselves tomorrow. It began to transmit. Admiral Ewan was in the middle of coordinating what remained of her fleet when her communications officer let out a sound of pure shock. Admiral, we are receiving massive data streams from the reclamation, the officer reported, her voice shaking with disbelief. It looks like technical specifications, weapons designs, engineering schematics, and there is so much information that our computers can barely handle it. The Admiral understood immediately what the Keeper was doing. Route everything to Earth. She ordered, send it to every university, every research facility, every engineer and scientist who is still alive down there. She opened a channel to the ancient vessel. Keeper, what is this? The Keeper's response carried a weight that made the Admiral's spine tingle. I have traveled far and seen much, it said. I have helped many species who showed me kindness, and in return they shared their knowledge with me. The data streams continued to flow, terabytes of information pouring into human networks faster than anyone could process. I give you now the accumulated wisdom of 100 grateful civilizations, the Keeper declared. Weapons that can match the Vareth, shields that can stop their attacks, engines that can carry you to the stars faster than you ever dreamed possible. Captain Elena Rodriguez stared at her screen as technical readouts scrolled past. Designs for technologies that human scientists had theorized about for decades, but never been able to build. This will take years to fully understand, her chief engineer said in a hushed voice. Then it is fortunate that you do not need to fully understand it, the Keeper replied, somehow hearing the conversation despite the distance between them. You need only to implement it, and I have made that as simple as I can. The designs came with instructions, step-by-step guides written in language that any competent engineer could follow. And those instructions began with the words that would change human history forever. "You have 3 hours." The keeper said, "Learn what you can, build what you must, and become what you were always meant to be. Down on Earth, in hidden bunkers, and makeshift laboratories and factory floors that had been seized from Vareth control." Human engineers began to work. They did not have the luxury of careful study or methodical testing. They read the alien designs, gathered whatever materials they could find, and started building in a bunker beneath Tokyo. A team of engineers constructed a shield generator using parts cannibalized from destroyed Vareth equipment and human technology alike. The generator should not have worked, according to everything human science understood about physics. But the keeper's instructions were precise enough that it did not need to make sense. It only needed to function. The shield generator was loaded onto a transport and launched toward the Chennai. The frigate that had been fighting 6 destroyers for what felt like an eternity. Captain Priya Sharma watched in amazement as her crew installed the alien device. And then she watched in absolute wonder as Vareth weapons fire that should have destroyed her ship was transformed into harmless light. "All ships. The technology works," she broadcast to the fleet. "I repeat, the technology works." In a factory in Germany, workers who had been making tanks for Earth's conventional military began producing something entirely different. The weapons looked similar to human designs, but their internals were completely alien. Power systems and focusing arrays that allowed a handheld rifle to punch through Vareth armor as if it were paper. These weapons were loaded onto dropships and sent to resistance fighters around the world in orbit. Surviving human frigates received upgrade packages transmitted directly from the reclamation. Modifications that their computers could barely process, but that their engineers somehow managed to install anyway. The Valiant was among the first to receive upgrades, and Elena Rodriguez felt her ship transform beneath her feet. Weapons systems online. Her tactical officer reported, wonder in his voice, "Admiral, our weapons are now hitting with 10 times their previous power." The Vareth War Master watched these developments with growing alarm. His tactical displays showed human ships that should have been easy kills suddenly becoming dangerous opponents. His ground forces reported that human resistance fighters were now carrying weapons that could actually hurt Vareth soldiers. His fleet, which had been grinding down the enemy through sheer numbers, was suddenly taking losses at an unacceptable rate. "Concentrate all fire on the alien vessel," he ordered, knowing that the reclamation was the source of this sudden change in the battle. But it was too late. The Keeper had given humanity 3 hours. And humanity had used every single minute. Ships that had been running and hiding were now fighting back effectively. Soldiers that had been dying in hopeless last stands were now winning actual victories. A species that had been on the verge of extinction was now standing up and pushing back. Admiral Ewan surveyed the battlefield and made a decision. "All ships, form up on the reclamation," she ordered. "It is time to go on the offensive." 12 human frigates, the survivors of the original 17, moved into formation around the ancient alien vessel. Together, they advanced on the Vareth fleet. The Keeper's weapons blazed alongside human guns, upgraded with alien technology. Vareth ships that had seemed invincible began to fall. The War Master stared at his tactical display in disbelief as his fleet began to break. He had conquered 100 worlds and had never faced anything like this. He had never faced a species that refused to give up. He had never faced a debt 11,000 years in the making. The Battle of Earth was about to enter its final phase. The Battle of Earth lasted 72 hours from the first Vareth ship appearing in the sky to the last enemy vessel fleeing into the darkness between stars. When it was over, humanity stood victorious among the wreckage of their world, battered and bloodied but unbroken. And they looked up at the stars with new eyes, the Vareth armada that had come to conquer. Earth had numbered 300 capital ships, more than enough firepower to destroy a dozen civilizations. And they had retreated with only 43 vessels still capable of flight. The flagship Eternal Subjugation drifted dead in space, its engines destroyed and its weapons silenced. And aboard that vessel, the Varth War Master sat in chains while human marines secured the ship around him. He could not understand what had happened. He had fought against 100 species across the galaxy, and every single one of them had eventually surrendered or been destroyed. But these humans had done neither. They had fought when fighting seemed hopeless. They had adapted when adaptation seemed impossible. They had stood together with an ancient alien that owed them a debt from before their civilization had even begun. And somehow they had won. Admiral Ewan walked through the corridors of the captured flagship, stepping over debris and past Varth prisoners who could not meet her eyes. And she felt a weariness that went deeper than her bones. So many had died to make this victory possible. The Snow Paulo and her entire crew sacrificed to destroy a Varith carrier, the Johannesburg, destroyed while broadcasting false signals that had confused enemy sensors, 8 other frigates and thousands of sailors. Gone forever in the cold darkness of space. On the ground, the losses were even worse. Millions of civilians killed in the initial invasion, and thousands of resistance fighters who had given their lives to fight back against impossible odds. But humanity survived. Earth survived. The dream of reaching for the stars had not been extinguished, and now that dream burned brighter than ever before. Admiral Ewan reached the observation deck of the captured flagship and looked out at the planet she had sworn to protect. Earth hung in the void like a blue jewel wrapped in white clouds, scarred by the fires of war, but still beautiful, still alive, still home. And beside it floated the Reclamation, the ancient vessel that had traveled 11,000 years to honor a debt of kindness. The ship looked even worse than before, its hull more scar tissue than original material, atmosphere still venting from wounds that would never fully heal. The Keeper had given everything it had to save humanity, and now it waited in silence as the last echoes of battle faded away. Admiral Ewan opened a communication channel. "Keeper," she said softly, "I do not have words to express what humanity owes you." The Keeper's response came slowly, its voice weaker than it had been at the start of the battle. "You owe me nothing," it said. "The debt was mine, and it has been paid." Elena Rodriguez listened to this exchange from the bridge of the Valiant, surrounded by her exhausted crew, and she felt tears forming in her eyes. "Will you stay with us?" the Admiral asked. "There is so much we could learn from you, and we would be honored to have you as our guest." The Keeper was silent for a long moment before responding. "No," it said finally. "I have seen what I came to see, and I have done what I came to do. And now I must continue my journey." Its many eyes, visible through the communication screen, held something that looked almost like warmth. "You do not need my guidance, Admiral Ewan," the Keeper continued. "Your ancestors showed me what humanity is capable of 11,000 years ago, and you have shown me that their spirit still lives in their descendants." The ancient being paused, and when it spoke again, its voice carried the weight of millennia. "You will face new challenges in the years to come," it said. "The Varth will tell others what happened here, and for a time your world will be left in peace. But eventually, new enemies will arise and new threats will test your resolve." Admiral Ewan nodded slowly, understanding what the Keeper was trying to say. "And when that time comes," the Keeper said, "I believe you will face those challenges as you faced this one, with courage and sacrifice and an absolute refusal to accept defeat." It was a compliment and a prophecy all at once. "There is one thing I would ask of you," the Keeper added. "A request rather than a repayment, if you are willing to hear it." "Name it," the Admiral said immediately. "In 11,000 years, should you encounter a species in need, Remember this day, the keeper said. Remember that kindness echoes across time in ways we cannot predict, and that a small act of compassion can ripple outward to change the fate of worlds. Elena Rodriguez heard those words and felt them sink into her heart like seeds waiting to grow. Your ancestors saved me when they had no reason to do so, the keeper continued, and because of that act of kindness, their descendants survived when all seemed lost. So I ask you to pay that forward, to help those who need help even when you have nothing to gain, to be the species I always believed you could be. Admiral Yuan smiled despite her exhaustion. We will remember, she promised. We will teach our children what you did for us, and we will teach them to do the same for others. The keeper's many eyes blinked in what might have been gratitude. Then my journey here was worthwhile, it said. Farewell, humans of Earth, and may your future be as bright as your hearts. The reclamation began to move, its damaged engines somehow still capable of propelling it toward the stars. And humanity watched in silence as the vessel that had saved them prepared to depart, before it vanished into the darkness between galaxies. The keeper sent one final transmission. The universe has a long memory, it said. So do we, Admiral Yuan replied, and then the reclamation was gone, folding space around itself and disappearing into the infinite void to continue a journey that had begun before human civilization was born. Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Valiant and watched the spot where the ancient vessel had been. Feeling something shift inside her that she could not quite name, she was standing at the beginning of a new era. She realized an era when humanity would rebuild and grow, and eventually reach out to claim its place among the stars. They would face challenges, as the keeper had predicted, new enemies and new threats and new tests of their resolve. But they would also remember what had happened here. The lesson that the keeper had taught them through action rather than words. Kindness mattered, compassion mattered, the willingness to help others, even when there was nothing to gain, mattered more than all the weapons and technology in the universe. Humanity began to rebuild. Cities rose from the ashes of the old. New ships were constructed using the technology the keeper had shared. Vessels capable of traveling distances the previous generations had only dreamed about. And in every school, in every home, in every ship that ventured out into the cosmos, the story was told, the story of ancient astronauts who saved a dying alien because it was the right thing to do, the story of a debt repaid across 11,000 years, the story of humanity's darkest hour and brightest triumph. Centuries later, when human ships appeared above the Varith homeworld, the aliens who had once tried to conquer Earth prepared for revenge, but the humans had not come to fight. They had come because the Varith were facing a threat they could not defeat alone. A cosmic disaster that would have destroyed their civilization without outside help. The Varith War Master, a descendant of the one who had been captured above Earth so long ago, stared at the human admiral in disbelief. Why would you help us? He demanded. After everything we did to your world. The admiral smiled and gave an answer that the Varith would never fully understand, because that is what humans do. She said simply, we help, and somewhere in the vast darkness between galaxies, the keeper of the reclamation sensed what was happening and felt something that might have been a smile cross its ancient features. The debt had been paid, and the lesson had been learned. Humanity had become what they were always meant to be, not conquerors, not destroyers, but helpers, and the universe would never be the same.